Teachtan arig beg an ládal chun sin stris na féle brida or dod men ma shoal. No, you needn't adjust your sets. It's me again, and we're proceeding into the spring of Nova Scotia, which is killing me. The poem I quoted just now says, now is the beginning of spring, and after St. Bridget's Day I will set out. Now St. Bridget's Day in Ireland is the 2nd of February. So here we are, and you'll notice I'm in green. Need I tell why? And one of the curious reasons is that my 1904 personality, I'm thinking amusedly that the man who is in the background of this entire work, Bernard Lonergan, I think amusedly that he was conceived on St. Patrick's Day, because he was born on December the 17th, 1904. So that's our 1904 personality. And if you're thinking over the course, you can think of the different people I've brought in so far and will bring in later. Schweitzer, Helen Keller, Einstein, so on, giving this a focus in real space and time. We're thinking about people who mind or don't mind through their lives. We're not thinking of a theory of reasoning, at least in the sense of somebody's theory. And again, I will come back to Bernard Lonergan a little later, but the problem we have is that we're not studying the writings of anybody, we're studying ourselves. Okay, so let's start as usual with this list of topics. And again, the listing amuses me. I was thinking this morning as I worked over this list that it was very like there was a British comedy, The Two Ronnies, and always at the beginning one of the Ronnies said, now we have a packed program in which we'll deal with the British railway system, the price of bangers and mash, the adultery in the monarchy, and go on from there. Well, we have a packed program, and I'm going to list the entire program, and I think it will take us the last 3 sessions to cover this. Our first topic may be minding, meaning, and mystery. That sounds nice. Our second topic, we've had it already listed, self-discovery and the Christian God. Our third topic is faith and art. Our fourth topic is cosmogenetics. You can think of that as the genesis of the cosmos. And it's the title of a section in chapter 4 of Process. And our fifth topic is the quest. Okay, and as I have been doing in the last couple of sessions, I add in a couple of exercises in the first section here, just to keep us in focus. An exercise that points to the reading I gave you, Bible Meaning Metaphysics, and an exercise about a common phrase. Okay, so let's start at the end here, mystery. That was on the bottom of my list, faith and various topics last week. Faith and art, faith and mystery was the end of the list. I'm putting it up here because I'm not going to treat it in any systematic fashion. I'm just throwing out hints. And I want to emphasize that at this stage in the course, that it is hints. Where are we going we're not rushing to a conclusion. We're slowing down and spiraling round. That was the diagram I gave at the beginning, to keep trying to get a glimpse of who we are basically. Now, the peculiarity is that the more you try sincerely, the more it emerges that you really haven't got a clue. But this depends on trying seriously. Sometimes people say, oh yeah, I got what you meant. I remember once meeting a learned chap who had been reading Bernard Lonergan's book, Insight, for a year. And I said, how are you managing? And he said, well, I have been through it and I have it pretty well nailed down now. And I said to him, funny, I've been at it 10 years and I haven't got a clue now. There's a paradox here, and you'll find it comes out when if you look at page 172 of the book. I quote some serious people. Sam Beckett is one of them. And he says at one stage, nobody who pays the slightest attention to their experience but will find that it's the experience of a non-knower. Now that's terribly optimistic. But the notion is that who are we and what are we doing and where are we going? It's a mystery. And as I mentioned last year, the problem is to restore that to our normal living. There's a way in which we live in the obvious, the neon light, the cult of the obvious, and we live in a state of non-surprise. And you have to think of that in terms of the institutions we talked about. I talked about dictionaries, I talked about universities, I talked about committees, I talked about our government. There's a sense in which nobody is expecting anything new. Now, I started with this poem in Irish, now is the beginning of spring. What I want us to think about really are the two foci of our work recently. Page 83 and page 203 of Process. On page 83, I keep putting this diagram down. You have capacity, the capacity and need that is me, and various other terms listed. And then down here, you have institution. The institution with its roles and its tasks. And I've been illustrating the institutions not just as buildings, churches, but dictionaries, books on philosophy of science, committee meetings, where you play roles and do tasks, and it's all pretty stale. And opposing that, there is the capacity and need that is us. And what we're trying to notice in this course is that this capacity and need is unknown. What is me? I will refer to Carl Jung next week, but there's a sense in which you can find out that some great thinkers of our century, like Carl Jung or Piaget, did not know the capacity and need that was what they were studying, which is quite remarkable. Okay, so that's one opposition, and then put that in the context of our handy little line with these arbitrary dates, minus 1000 BC and plus sometime after 2500 AD. I'm being optimistic that we can't go on abusing human beings for the next 500 years, but let's hope not. Okay, so the notion of mystery requires that we actually retrieve something that was present and is present in primitive groups, a sense of mysteriousness that gave rise to, say, the circle dance I talked about. And it's something that is very hard to build into one's senses in the 20th century. The poet's phrase, "Nor does foot feel being shod." But on the level of minding, of thinking, mystery is revealed insofar as you make a serious effort to understand. And some of you are really getting there. It's marvelous. I have a note here from one student. No, I'm not going to quote your name. It's all right. Somebody may guess the identity of this. There's a long note, and the ending is, I guess I was underestimating myself. This is a very important thing to notice. Not only are you underestimating yourself, you've been underestimated by everybody. There's a wish implicit in the bones of modernity to make you a cog in the wheel. It's the desire of any of the 20th century institutions, whether government or church. We don't want a sudden change. I jokingly mentioned the possibility of a political party voting itself out of existence. We're actually irrelevant now. It's comic. Okay, I guess I was underestimating myself. Yes, somebody who did reasonably well in the exam. However, I do seem right back to square one after listening to your lecture Sunday morning. I guess that's to be expected. Pretty heavy stuff. Hopefully now, though, I'll take it one small step at a time and not despair in the fact that I can't understand it at all. That's terrific. Okay, one small step. We're back at new man's struggle in the last century. And some of you are still struggling with the surprising notion that problems we hit on here are problems that might take you 10 years. Can you imagine a government official saying we have a problem here, and if we work on it hard enough, we might have a solution in 10 years? Well, that won't get him elected. So we are struggling with problems here that actually took people a lot more than 10 years. The self-discovery and the Christian God, we worked on it last day, and I listed the dates of a community struggling, starting with the Council of Nicaea in 325, right up to the Council of Constantinople, the Third Council of Constantinople, 681. That's a long time to puzzle with. And you can't bypass that, and this will be a topic in our exercise here. The odd thing is that this is an education of humanity, and it's slow, but a good teacher and a good community can lift you through this. But it's not by the bypassing of mind that I talked about the last. And again here, I keep referring back to our basic diagrams as props. What did I mean by the bypassing of mind? Let's put down that diagram again, because it's very important when we analyze this little phrase, which I amused myself thinking about through the afternoon. Okay, the bypassing of mind. Minding means that something, some mess, whether it's me or a situation or the economy, really puzzles me. Yeah? And I really have to think and make that leap and come up with, let's call it, just to use a word that will occur later, come up with an inner word. Okay. You come up with an inner word. Now, what am I saying here? This is what is called a definition. The easiest instance is when this is the practical question of what to cook. The bright ideas, yeah, nice things to put together, but you're not going to do the thing properly unless you work out the inner word. It's not just a menu, it's the recipe for the entire event. Does that make sense? If you think over running, say, running a wedding, and God help us, when I think of that immediately, I think of the stupid institutions we have. in which we constitute the misery of a wedding day. But let's not go into that. You know those formal occasions when you're trapped beside, people you don't know, and God, how long is this going to last? Okay, so the inner word is something that, in the case of, say, a dinner party, it's an understanding that is produced into definitions of, or a definition that controls all the details. And if you're the MC, the master of ceremonies, or if you're the coach for tennis or football, you're able to talk out of this. Isn't that fair enough? Yeah? Think of, say, Navratilova's coach in tennis. She loses the game. What did I do wrong? It happens to be a man. The guy says, you missed this in the second set. You were moving a certain way. Why? Because he's got this controlling inner word that permits him to see things differently, notice things. Okay, so from the mess, you have this inner word, a theory of economics, and then you can express it. Okay, there are outer, let's say, words. Now, the bypassing of mind I've been talking about fairly solidly in the last 2 sessions is when you're just given the outer words, and if you repeat them often enough, you can remember them. And if you remember them, you can check off a multiple guess exam. And what has happened to you? Well, you have been suffering mental abuse. Okay, so the function of a teacher or a tradition is to so change the outer words and expressions and experiences that this happens. And you're alive and alert. And the question we're running into regularly from people corresponding to me is the slowness of it. It's a surprise to find out that, yeah, these little puzzles in Chapter 2, Section 5, well, it takes time. What then of the puzzle of the economy? Who's going to sit down for 10 years? Later I'll talk about Lonergan doing it, sitting down for 10 years. Okay, so that's a feature of this question of mystery. That one can talk about mystery vaguely and say that things are difficult, etc. But unless you make the effort, it's not revealed to you. It's not an epiphany. It's not manifest. Okay. Meaning, all along we're talking about the elements of meaning. And I think we all remember them at this stage, don't we? Yes? A few of them? 10 of them? Okay. Last day we talked about 13 plus. And we don't need to repeat them regularly, except it's handy just to note them down. And again, I'm using this 5-level diagram. It's quite convenient. Last day I pointed out that the 2 what questions are really the same. They're what about possibilities. What might that be? Something that happened. What might that be? Something that's going to happen. Okay. So you have the level of sensibility, the 2 what questions, and the 2 is questions. Is and is to do. Now you'll find when you read over process for the 10th time, you'll find process 172, etc. around there. There's a discussion of mystery. And if you want to follow up on it, you'll find that you'll notice that we are whatters, and the whatter gives you some idea. but we're also isers. And there's a sense, and again, I'm inviting you to work on this for the next 10 years or so. If you're in a hurry, it'll take you 20. We are isers, and we are nodders. The whole question of nodding comes back. We're in the land of nod. And somehow, this doesn't give us ideas. It is. Well, what do you mean? Well, it is. But there's some sense in which ising doesn't get you any what. Now, that's a huge topic. And again, I keep remarking that this is a superficial half credit, and this is quite another course. Thomas talks about God as being, he who is, or they who is, and we do not know what God is. That's connected with this question of mystery. But I emphasize our important thing is that mystery is got at insofar as you make an effort to reach meaning, and that means that these elements are actually operating. You're pushing forward. It's not a definition you memorize. Meaning is when these in one are stretching, reaching. And the sadness that I expressed 2 lectures ago when I talked about, in terms of Mahler in 1904 writing the songs of the death of children, is that we seem to have structured institutions to kill off this almost from the word go. So that reaching is not welcome. I don't think I mentioned one of my experiences of teaching a class on art, in fact, in Seaton one day, and one mother who had a daughter, an unmarried mother, and her daughter was out of school that day, and the daughter started asking questions, but she apologized at the beginning and said, "Is it all right to ask questions?" So I said, "Yes." And later, and this girl bubbled along. We talked about Diaghilev and Nijinsky. The little girl was really into this, alive and well. Heavens, you know, it's great to see bright eyes in the class occasionally. But the mother told me afterwards that the teacher in one of her classes, the little girl had put up her hand during the week and asked a question, and the teacher said, "You're not here to ask questions, you're here to learn." Now, if you're told that often enough, the way to survive is to cut back on this and get into this. Yeah? Okay, so that reaching is meaning. What is meaning? I teach a course, well, have taught a course. The title now is The Meaning of Meaning. Meaning is what we all do. We use these elements. We don't know we're doing it. Is that fair enough? I'm sure a lot of you can recall that you never heard of these 13 elements before this course. So meaning is what we do, and the question in philosophy and theology, I'm not separating them, philosophy of religion in this case, is what is meaning? Why is it important to raise that question? Because, again, I refer back to the quotation I ended with last day from Welt, page 77. Because for centuries, men in education, and men mainly, people, economists, philosophers, and so on, have done not a little to make life unlivable. Meaning is being excluded. The great German thinker talks about the murderous grotesque of our time. So it's important to find out what is this that is being destroyed. And all we can do in these last few sessions is to notice this, notice it a little more, notice it in the odd exercise. What are we trying to do? We're trying to mind meaning, or mind minding. Detect detecting. And the real problem comes back to the word maybe. My poem, Inish Jachtonarig, this is the beginning, spring. And to move to an optimism, I expressed an optimism in my odd statement that we're not really down out of the trees yet. There's a way in which in the last 2 centuries, 3 centuries, the Enlightenment and so on, progress, we're living in an illusion that we're at the end, man has come of age, and woman with man, I presume the great thinkers mean. No, we haven't learned how to talk. And that's connected with this exercise. The question of maybe. To have a springtime mentality. Perhaps it's more difficult in Nova Scotia than it is in Ireland. In Ireland, you see, spring starts in January, and it goes on until April. In here, if you sleep late some morning in May, you'll miss it. Okay, so we talked a good deal about maybe over the last few weeks, and I keep bringing back that maybe. Maybe you'll be attentive. And it relates to the question of faith. There's a sense in which faith builds an energy towards the realization of the maybe. Think of, say, the film, the ballet, whatever, of The Impossible Dream, Don Quixote. To dream the impossible dream. And the problem is to exercise yourself in making that concrete. Imagine a school where everyone knows about this. It's taken for granted that the child is a yearning for beauty, understanding, truth, good times, love. And also to be realistic about it, either for oneself or for one's institutions. And a robust sense of humor is vital. To have a serious sense of the organized idiocy in which we live. I joked last week because it was the week of the politics, the Super Tuesday in America, heavens above. And I won't comment further on the institutions of Canadian politics. So a sense of humor and faith. And as I mentioned, there is a sense in which part of this movement out of the 20th century is real democracy as opposed to democracy of the vote. We'll talk about it later in terms of art. That however shabby the education, still there is some sort of thing going on that is stirring the masses, if you like, to use a Marxian phrase. A shift in South Africa in the last 48 hours. Okay, so maybe. Now, coming down from that, opening up the topic of mystery, meaning, minding, maybe, what we have to do is do little exercises that help us to notice this and notice it in ourselves and in others and in lots of others. And that's the exercise that I'm inviting you to do in relation to that reading Bible, meaning, metaphysics. It's a short few pages. We did our first exercise the last day, relating to the development of an understanding of the Bible. And I took a parallel between malaria and Messiah. You read a note to a doctor mentioning malaria, or the doctor reads it and the doctor understands. And that understanding is not in the primitive community that invented the word malaria. It's a lot of hard work. It's very far removed from the, say, the primitive mythology of malaria. Dance around the man. Similarly, Messiah. And then back to the phrase I used in the third week, I know that my Redeemer liveth. Who is this Redeemer? That's a lot of work. And to be an adult Christian means you actually ask what? Now, I related that to prayer in a discussion of faith-seeking understanding. Is it scientific? Yes. I'm talking about a type of contemplation that is thinking. I'm talking about what is important in real friendship. You do not address your friend like a public meeting or in ritual phrases. Well, if you do, it's not a friendship, it's a faith. So with the divinity in whatever tradition, one remains human, one remains of water. And I've had reactions from people who don't like the way I phrase questions, me associating, for instance, the phrase, what the hell are you? Or who the hell are you? With prayer. Well, it makes the point. Okay, so the Messiah is far more difficult to understand than malaria. And reading the Bible is a task that has taken centuries. And the problem is to read it within that accumulation of meaning. That's a very difficult task, and it's a very difficult topic. It's an area of enormous dispute within the Christian tradition. But I would invite you to think of the foolishness of the statement that says, we want the plain meaning of the Bible. What is there in the Bible? Black marks on white paper. Is there any truth in it? No. Where's the truth? The truth is only in the human mind. Let's leave out the divine mind for the moment. Truth is what you get at by correctly understanding experience. Now, I hope that's giving you lots of problems. That was the exercise last week. The exercise this week is much simpler, and it relates not just to the Bible, but to any book whatsoever. In process, I say, if you don't happen to have the Bhagavad Gita around, take a book on billiards. What am I asking you to do? Now, you can do this in detail or very generally. Very generally, you take the book and you pick out the question marks. Now, what do you find? You find that, yeah, the Bible has question marks in it, and you can identify the questions, the what questions, there are why questions, there are where and how, and see, can you identify these questions as relation to the elements? And then you can move from the Bible to the Greek tradition and see they are like this too. Now, what I'm pointing you towards is a meta, a going beyond any culture, any local culture. There is a terrific dispute, which we touched on the last day, about the influence of Greek metaphysics on Christian theology. Now, I tried to bring out the last day that there were some very simple puzzles, and people got names to get out of these puzzles. What this exercise helps you to do is to notice that the Greeks and the Hebrews have the same elements. Does that make sense? And the Chinese. Now, extend this exercise from this article to any book on grammar. During the last couple of years, I went through libraries of Indian grammars. There's about 14 or 15 languages in that's the Asian India. And you find, yes, the same structure, same basic structure is manifested in their words. So that's an exercise. You may not have time to do it, especially if you're doing 5 credits in the next few weeks. But save it up for the beach in the summer. Now, you can do it in detail, and it's a lot more work. I thought of bringing in a piece of Shakespeare, a couple of pages from one of the plays, where I had gone line by line through the text and picked which of the 13 was dominant in each line. It's pretty obvious when you find to be or not to be. Yeah, well, okay, you can take that off up here. But it's not easy all the time. Okay, so these are exercises in the course that help you to come back to our basic discovery. Now, the point made by this student is that, yeah, I find them at the beginning again. Yes, we're at the beginning again. And with a bit of luck, you'll be at the beginning again and again and again. Okay. Now, my second exercise and again, it's a genus of exercises. You can do this with phrases you are familiar with. And I like this statement. It's a normal part of academic conversations. I don't quite see what you mean. Would you clarify? That last statement. Okay, now we're going to do the exercise. Remember the last day we did the exercise on from the Rain Man. He doesn't have the concept of money. From Star Trek, I wonder, has it got the same concept of reason as we do? And you find that the language is desperately distorted by a very erroneous view of mind. Now think of this as a statement. Let's say you're talking to a friend, or as I say, it's very academic. Can you imagine this being said at a learned lecture? I don't quite see what you mean. Would you clarify that last statement? Okay. This amuses me enormously because it's so academic. I was thinking of a colleague of mine who got together a seminar of professors. It was in a Boston university, and he told me after a few years, he said, you know, Phil, it took me 2 years to get any one of them to say, I don't know. Now, what's going on here? I don't quite see what you mean. I'm clueless. And would you give me a clue? Okay, now let's look at this. Would you clarify? Now recall our way of summarizing the wrong theory of mind. You have a mind and you get concepts and you analyze them. Conceptual analysis, clarification. That's not how our minds work. This goes back to this fellow Scotus I talked about. And by the way, I gave you his wrong death day a couple of weeks ago. He actually died in 1308. I think I mentioned 1306. Anyway, he comes after Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was quite clear that the mind was, well, the Big Mac, I'd call it. You have a mind and you have the ah experience. Ah, ah. Puzzling, insight. And then you have a concept. The concept follows. Now, what does this mean? Well, first of all, it fits into the notion that, well, really, we all pretty well know everything about everything, and just a little clarification and we'll be okay. The minister clarified the state of the economy. Wow. the reality of normal conversation, education, and so on, is this. Somebody makes a statement, E equal to mc squared. It's not that I don't see quite what you mean. I have no idea what that means. Would you please give me some illustrations? Does that make sense? This is an exercise in reflecting on your own language, words you may use regularly. I want to clarify my concept. Well, check. Have you got any first? But would you clarify that statement? That does not belong in human conversation. What do we do? If there is a statement made by somebody to you, and you really are serious about understanding, then you appeal to the other person to give you clues, to make noises, to turn the diagram around, to make a supposing. Does that make sense? Look at it this way. Look at it that way. Now, that does not happen in academic discourse. There's a way in which talk is in footnotes, and it's all bluff. I'm sure the stray colleagues that are watching me on Sunday morning are amused at my risky statements. Okay, so this is a reflection on a statement, regular sort of statement. I don't quite see what you mean. Would you clarify that? And what I'm trying to get you to notice is that this doesn't belong in human conversation. And we're back to this question of mystery and meaning and minding meaning. And maybe if we try to converse. And above all, maybe if we found what it was that was conversing, we'd have a better chance. In the class this morning, I like working out these sort of mythic stories. And I said, suppose some big company like IBM donated 1,000 computers to the Mount. Donating these, and we didn't know what to do with them. We didn't understand computers. Or say television sets. So we got these boxes upon boxes moving into the university. Well, what do we do with them? Well, we need flower stands in the classrooms. And if you put 3 of these on top of one another, you can put a flower pot on top. It's nice. So we could find a use for the 1,000 television sets. Say we don't even open the boxes. Okay, we got these 1,000 boxes. So you can do all sorts of things with boxes, you know. And after a couple of weeks, somebody turns up from IBM to see, how's it going? And looks around at the boxes in various positions, doing various things. The person would say, that's not what they're for. They're for such and such. You have to understand what they're for. Now, think of that in terms of human beings. Yeah? And be amused that we don't know what we're for. I find that sadly amusing. Okay, so that's our exercises for today, and good heavens, time is rolling away. I met a colleague the other, well, Patrick Stady. She told me she had kissed the Blarney Stone, and I didn't, in fact. I looked at it once, and I felt, heavens, I don't need to kiss that. You have to hang down over a wall. But still, I seem to talk a lot. Maybe it's just a Celtic affliction. Okay. Self-discovery and the Christian God. I really need that line, but we can put it back again. Okay, let's see. This is a huge problem. And I'll try and touch on it in a way that will keep bringing us back to this and to this. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Greeks and the Greek tradition. Then I'm going to talk about the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I'm going to talk about the New Testament up to 1277. That's quite a project, eh? Okay, and I'm starting with the Greek tradition, because that's where we get this stuff. I talked about the discovery of Socrates, basically discovering this: I'm a whatter, and discovering it painfully, and finding out what Beckett talks of as easily recognizable. It's not. I'm a whatter and I'm a non-knower. I lack insight. And what makes me wise, again, this is the tradition about Socrates, what makes me wise is that I know I'm a non-knower. And I referred to the quotation in Wealth, page 18, the quotation from Bernard Lonergan's Insight, page 542, the challenge of Socrates to detect the person that can talk with eloquence, flow on in words, talk like this. And Socrates was the gadfly, very uncomfortable man to have a conversation with. There's a terrific dialogue of Plato, the Gorgias, where Socrates talks to a rhetorician, and this chap claims that he can teach anybody anything. And gradually Socrates reveals that this guy is clueless. Now that's not terribly welcome. Okay, but see, he discovered that. Plato discovered this zone, form, I think mainly through doing geometry. That, yeah, the definition of a circle is invisible. It's a hidden thing. You can write out words, you can memorize them, but getting the definition, wow. And it's not visible, the definition of a circle. Or an ellipse, or a hyperbola, or a conic section generally. And Aristotle, as I mentioned already, put in this twist. How do you get insight? By puzzling about experience. Now, I'll talk mainly about these three for the moment. Aristotle did come up with this notion that insight emerges from puzzling about experience. And he continued to puzzle himself about what is all of experience about. Now, there's no way I'm going to sweep through Aristotle here this evening, but I want to leap to his eventual conclusion, if you like, or the point he makes in book Lambda, L of the Metaphysics. And that point is that the supreme, the good, the ultimate, that Plato talked about, what is this? It is understanding. The enormous attractive divinity for Aristotle. This is not the translation you'll find in most translations. You'll find in most translations that the words here are thinking, thinking, or thinking thought. Most translators come into this tradition, translators into English, and this excludes noticing understanding as an event or as a word. But Aristotle meant understanding. The supreme in understanding, an understanding of understanding, an understanding of everything. And that's a huge leap within the Greek tradition to a notion that emerges as the identity of the divinity in the Christian tradition. Understanding, understanding, very understanding. And again, as we discussed this in the last few weeks, I emphasized to get out of an intellectual notion of understanding kindliness, limitless kindliness, attractive. You recall our discussion of the orientations of these levels as wise, as reaching out, and as callings. This is very much Aristotelian. And if you like, the reach of us, we are waters seeking understanding. The wish to understand and be understood. And that reach is, it's identified as a reach towards this in Aristotle. Now that Greek tradition pretty well died around 322 BC, give or take a year. We'll see how it emerged later. Okay, let's move to the Hebrew tradition. And again, this is an enormous topic. All I can do is give little hints. And the little hint I'm picking up on here is a little hint. Let's go back a bit. Around the year 720. And there was a funny guy. That's one spelling of the name, Hosea. And Hosea describes the divinity as inviting him to treat his aberrant wife as the divinity treats the Hebrew people, with an enormous kindliness and tolerance. Now, I know the feminist tradition has difficulties with this. One has to accept that this Bible is predominantly patriarchal and androcentric, and get the best out of it that we can. But it's a powerful image, whether you take the God as male or female, the care of the aberrant partner, the kindliness and the forgiveness. And there's some terrific poetry. It's a very short book, 14 chapters. And it's earlier than the emergence of Greek drama and so on. And this image persists right through. There is the God of wrath and so on, but there's the gentleness, there's the lover coming through the Old Testament. And that is in continuity with the revelation, the person we talked about the last day in the New Testament. And I emphasized last day that I was swinging into the Christian perspective here, unapologetically. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that there may be those who are not Christian, who are interested in this, and should be, just as I'm interested in the Hindu tradition. So, well, what is the Christian divinity? Nonetheless, because I hold that all this process is human, not tied to a creed, you find in the title of the book that chapter 5 is bracketed Christian. And we're homing in on chapter 5 of the book at the moment. What is the Christian divinity? Okay, the New Testament contribution was the one we discussed the last day. I described it in terms of very simple mathematics. That somehow you had 1 and 1 is 1, and 1 is 1 plus 1 plus 1. I connected that with Peter's confession. Matthew 16, 17. There's a parallel confession in St. John we might talk about later. John's gospel can be regarded as much more non-institutionalized in the normal sense, even feminist. It's a terrific gospel revealing quite other and neglected part of Christianity, where the confessions of the divinity and the revelation of Jesus are feminine and much more subtle. Feminine intuition. Okay. But at any rate, we talked about that. The consubstantiality, they were all the same somehow. The one person of Jesus with two natures, and the three persons in the divinity, just names. No great thinking out of this. Whatever is going on in the Christian divinity, it's not oneness. There's a triplicity, very much John's Gospel 14, 15, 16. And understanding is the characteristic of this. Now, is it the one understanding? These are problems that follow up the struggles we talked about the last day. And there's a terrific clue emerging from the Council of 681. We'll get back to that a little bit, I hope. Okay, so the shift to the New Testament doesn't change the notion of the divinity as limitless understanding. Forgive them, they know not what they do. Infinite kindliness. The lamentations of Jesus over Jerusalem. I longed, etc. My people, what have you done? And that is a tradition in the New Testament that persists in spite of institutions within Christianity that somehow go against it. I talked about this the last day as a dominant type of institution that somehow doesn't seem to mirror the Christian God. Now, we'll have to get back into that a little bit in the second half. And our problem is, can we sweep through these 20 centuries and pick up on a notion of the Christian divinity that did emerge in the serious contemplatives of the medieval period and was eliminated by the condemnations of 1277.